Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us. It's good morning for us. That's Kyle and Sean and myself as we record this week's edition of our Shaw Local Bears Insider podcast. And no, we are not under attack. Don't worry, everything's okay. One of our group, Mr. Hammond, lives down in the city near the lake, and the air show is in town this weekend. And we could not get them to schedule their dress rehearsal around our podcast. So you may hear some B-1 bombers, some supersonic jets, the Blue Angels. God knows who's going to fly through this podcast. But know that everybody's safe, and it's not a technical glitch on our end, which, by the way, we apologize for. You haven't heard from us in a few weeks because as we sat down to record for you last week, there was something going on.
I swear it was quiet until the moment we jumped on this call. I did not hear a single thing all morning.
I think they're probably getting by so they can catch bits of the podcast. Sean, I think they got a bunch of Bears fans flying up there, and they figure they can get us on their shortwave as they fly over your apartment. So hopefully, folks, it won't be too disruptive. If it does, we'll figure out another angle, but we think we're going to be okay with just an occasional grin as one of these jets flies by. We did have a technical issue last week, and we're so sorry for that because we know it's been a few weeks now since we've gotten to visit with you. But thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Hub Arkush. We are joined, as we are each week, by our group sports editor at Shaw Media, Kyle Nabors, and our Shaw local BearsInsider.com beat reporter on the Bears beat, Sean Hammond. Guys, it is certainly never dull around the Chicago Bears these days. Some good news, some not so good news. And it seemed like there was breaking news all week this past week, this third week of Bears training camp as they prepare for the second exhibition versus the Buffalo Bills. And Sean, I can't say that we were shocked when Matt walked in the room. I believe it was Wednesday morning. I can't remember if it was Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning. And he starts each morning. We start somewhere between 8 and 8:15 with a rundown of who will or will not be in practice because of various issues, whether they be injuries, whether they be what the Bears are calling load management these days. We'll talk about that in a little while, or personal issues, COVID-related stuff. And it's been a I wouldn't say a lengthy list, but there's been names every day. Sometimes just 2 or 3, sometimes 5 or 6. Tevin Jenkins was mentioned every day the first week of camp as some minor back soreness, something we're dealing with, something we feel good about. We hope to have him ready soon, but he's not going. And then as week 2 rolled around, they stopped even mentioning Tevin because we knew he hadn't been practicing. And the next step was going to be to tell us when he was going to practice. And then all of a sudden on Tuesday, really almost 3 weeks later, Matt comes in the room and says, well, we do have to tell you that Tevin Jenkins is going to be having back surgery today. And so as someone who's had 3 back surgeries, most recently last November, I can tell you, number one, it didn't get scheduled overnight or in the morning. So obviously the Bears have been considering this for several weeks and weighing all their options. Matt did explain that they had tried everything else and got to the point where they just felt it was his best interest and the best chance to have him for, they hope, a significant part of the season to get the surgery done now. We do not know what kind of surgery was done. As I said, I'm a veteran of these procedures, and I can tell you there is back surgery and there is back surgery. We're led to believe that this is not serious. We're told that it went well. I'll talk about the various possibilities for rehab in a minute, Sean, but really it kind of sent a jolt through the room because we had been left to believe that his return was imminent any moment.
Yeah, they hadn't really, that we still don't exactly know what's wrong with his back. So we can say that we think it's minor, but we really don't have any idea what the issue is here. And Matt Nagy wouldn't address that when asked directly about it, said that he couldn't answer that, and really didn't give much of a timetable either. This dragged on long enough that at a certain point, I guess it wasn't a surprise. But at the same time, I mean, like you said, Hub, everything that they had told us was indicating that he was, getting closer to being back. We kept hearing he was trending in the right direction, which obviously that wasn't the case. And I don't know, how they could have been feeling that way when we wind up here with surgery and probably a lengthy recovery process here.
Well, again, guys, I can talk a little bit. I'm not shocked that you can go so quickly from I'm rehabbing or I'm doing PT, I'm doing physical therapy to I'm back on the operating table. I've actually had an experience like that. That can happen. And so for that, there's really nobody to point fingers at. But the other interesting part of this story, before we get back to Tevin, Kyle, is that Sean and I are sitting in the press box last Saturday covering the Dolphins game. It was actually, I believe, as we left the press box to walk down to the post-game interviews that it started blasting on Twitter that the Bears had signed Jason Peters. And so now you're bringing in a 39-year-old, almost lockdown future Hall of Famer to try and play the left tackle position when you just invested extra draft choices to trade up to get a kid at number 2 who was supposed to be a plug-and-play starter. Not to mention that you also got an extra pick in that trade and used that on another tackle who you thought was a right tackle, but now might be a left tackle. And so, Matt is asked about Jason Peters, and the first question after that is, well, what does this have to do with the injury to Tevin Jenkins? And Matt tells us absolutely nothing. It has nothing to do with Tevin Jenkins. Well, at the time, I knew that wasn't true, and I am not saying that Matt Nagy is dishonest. That's not. He's not. He's a pretty good guy. I think he has plenty of integrity. But part of an NFL coach's job is to be able to tell little white lies when necessary in the best interest of developing your story and developing your team. Nonetheless, the moment I know that I knew that they had brought in Jason Peters, there was obviously something up with Jenkins. I just assumed that maybe they had come to the realization was going to be a longer rehab than they had hoped. But that's where the surgery suddenly coming on Tuesday or Wednesday, we should have put the pieces together, and yet got so focused on the excitement about bringing in a guy like Jason Peters that again, it caught us by surprise when we heard that Jenkins was going under the knife.
Yeah, absolutely. Peters, it's hard to know how much he has left in the tank at 39 years old. He did fare pretty decent last year. It wasn't a total collapse where it's one of those street free agents where you're just a Hail Mary. You immediately see the comparisons to the Orlando Pace signing about a decade ago. Anytime you're talking about an aging left tackle, you do have to worry about that. It's certainly worth giving him a look considering what they have at the offensive tackle position. But going back to Jenkins, we've now seen this really across John Fox and Matt Nagy where you kind of have to attribute it going higher than the head coaching position in terms of how they handle injuries. But what's frustrating is, no NFL team is transparent. Let's not kid ourselves, right? But there's a difference between being very cryptic, 2 weeks into the season about if your starting quarterback or your starting left tackle is going to play, and something that has clearly been an issue throughout camp. And it gets frustrating, I'm sure, one from a media perspective, but from a fan perspective, like the level of misinformation that you get out of that when it was clear pretty quickly that this was going to be at least a setback in terms of would he be ready for week 1. And as it continued to drag on, I think it became pretty clear that this was going to be something that was going to go into the regular season.
Well, and there's some other interesting stuff here, guys, and I'm going to dodge the whole issue of the Bears and the media because it's a developing relationship, we shall call it, even 4 years later in the Matt Nagy era. But my experience has been that fans and our audience don't really care that much about what the media's access and relationship and information is. And so I don't know that there's any point in dealing with that here. For those of you who are regular listeners and our subscribers, if you do want to know more, let us know and we'll get into it.
I don't mean that in terms of like us, really, but it's the same thing. Like, when it comes to a preseason injury like that, and you're clearly not being told anything close to the truth. It's aggravating as a fan.
Yeah, it's still a message to the fans too.
I mean, it's just poking people in the eye when you don't really need to.
You guys are absolutely correct, and the reason I don't totally discount it is because this is not the only instant of something that appears that it could be that way. The Bears do have an issue at times with what they're willing to share. But now I want to go back in this particular case to having some firsthand experience with these kind of situations. And, back surgery is a very funny thing. I had my first one 17 years ago and got incredibly lucky because it was a complete success and didn't have to do anything for, another 11 years after that. But then, the spinal column deteriorates and worse things happen. Had to have a fusion in the cervical spine 3 years ago. And again, thought I'd made a complete recovery. And then all of a sudden, last year happens again. I don't think we ever talked about it, but I actually had a pretty significant back surgery mid-season last year. Pretty sure I didn't miss a podcast, as I recall. So my point being that you deal with a back, it becomes a lifetime companion once you start with back trouble. And especially when you're 21 years old and 6'6", 330 pounds, no matter what happens here and how successful it is. And there's a good chance that Tevin Jenkins can go on to have, an 8, 10, 12-year career in the NFL and be very good. That is absolutely on the table. But no matter what happens here, he is now a back patient, and this is going to dodge him his whole life. And what happens is you've got several different issues that can develop. We hear about muscle spasms. Well, fortunately, those are not structural issues. Those are the muscles around the back, and those get dealt with one way. They can be debilitating and take you off the field, but they can also be cured sometimes very quickly. Sometimes they can linger, but it's a different type of approach to when there is actually issues with the spinal column and with the discs that are part of the spinal column. So then you get to category number 2 is, does he have some irritation, and is it just bulging in some discs? Because that's where normally you're not going to go under the knife. That's where normally you're going to try all this rehab. You're going to do all the things that I'm sure he's been doing. And it is quite possible that what they went in to repair was some damage that has been caused by bulging discs, where they've created scar tissue and pressed on nerves, depending on where they are. But then there's the third possibility, which is where a disc actually herniates. And that's when it explodes and it starts to leak fluid. And then it builds up all kinds of tough cartilage and scar tissue and starts to press on nerves. And that's when you got a kind of a nightmare scenario on your hands. I am completely confident that Jenkins is not in category 3, because it wouldn't have gotten this far, without going in and fixing it. But he is most likely in that second category, where he's got some bulging discs and he's got some things pressing on nerves, and there may have been some disc material that was pressing on nerves or irritating muscles, and that can be a relatively quick cleanup. And that can be a relatively quick rehab. I know that I had that first surgery, which was laminectomy and discectomy, which is what I just described. And I was in the hospital one night, and the surgeon told me when I got home the next morning, I should go out and walk 2 blocks and then walk twice a day and add a block every time. So by 5-6 days later, I'm out walking a mile or two. By 2-3 weeks later, you're pretty much back to normal with walking. Now, you want to protect that surgical area. But as I recall, it was about 8 to 10 weeks when I was, done with physical therapy and cut loose to pretty much do what I wanted to do. Now, I wasn't playing football in the NFL, but I'm just trying to give you a time frame here that conceivably gets a guy back as early as week 5 or week 6. I think what they're probably shooting for is mid-season, because they're going to be very careful with him. They're going to do a complete rehab here. And so I think that's why the decision was made now, as opposed to wait longer and find out they were going to have to do this in 4 or 5 weeks and possibly risk the whole season. And Sean, not in that detail or in those words, but I think that's pretty much what Matt Nagy told us.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, they might not even know exactly when he's going to be back right now, because they got to see how his body reacts to the surgery and to the rehab. And they have some of the best rehab people out there, so they're going to be treating him. He's going to be getting the best possible care that he can, and from that perspective, they're going to bring him back when the time is right.
I'm sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we have some questions in here that I want to start bringing in when we get a chance. So if you want,
I just want to give you one more point, and then we can get to the questions, because one of this may be the question on one of them. Is that there is another element to this that I'm interested, because nobody's touched it yet. I thought about writing about it last night, but without enough, actual facts to support it, it just becomes speculation. But it is real and worth talking about. During that initial press conference, as we all had our various questions for Matt, tried to get our arms around it, I asked him, when did this happen? Matt went on the radio a couple of weeks ago and said that they were aware that he'd had some back issues in Stillwater at Oklahoma State. Apparently, he had some back soreness late last season. It was not included in most of the pre-draft analysis that I saw. It wasn't considered to be significant, and more to the point, Tevin Jenkins came to Chicago, was a full participant in rookie minicamp, all the OTAs, and veteran minicamp. And I went back because when I asked Matt, at what point he said he really couldn't remember. And I said, but he was a full participant in the mini camps. And he said, and he wasn't dodging me. I mean, it was just, I didn't remember either. But here's what's important. It turns out that Tevin actually talked to us. He was one of the media interviews we had the last day of veteran minicamp and talked about what he was going to do during his break. And he said, I'm looking forward to spending some time with my girlfriend and her family, but I'm going to be back to training 100% because I need to get ready. I can't wait to get back on the field. And so there was no indication that there was any back issue. Now, what that means, if it's true, is that something happened while he was away from the team. This became a huge issue around the NFL last spring when Jawan James tore an Achilles in Denver and they knew he'd be out for the season. And the Broncos basically canceled his $10 million contract because he suffered an injury away from the team for which the team is not liable. There have been several other issues like that. It's not a factor in this case because this is your second round draft pick who's never been on the field. You're not going to just waive him because he's having a minor back surgery. But this idea of players getting injured away from the team, Kyle, is a significant concern around the league. And until we hear differently, just being Sherlock Holmes, you kind of got to assume that that's what happened here with Tevin Jenkins.
That's a good point, reading between the lines. Maybe that's why they're being hesitant to tell us what happened and give us kind of a timeline. I don't know. So we have quite a few questions or comments in here about the offensive line. I'm going to start going through, guys.
Kyle, we should mention if you guys want to ask questions, the best way to do that is through the YouTube link, correct, Kyle?
Yeah. If you jump into the YouTube chat, you can go ahead and throw them in there. I'm going to start. This wasn't really a question, more of a comment, but it's a topic that, now I got to find it again. So many questions. I got a lot of people in here today, so that's good. Let's see here. Oh, here's from Trevor. Jenkins' injury makes the Leno release even more aggravating.
Trevor, I'm sorry you feel that way. It doesn't aggravate me at all. It's, it was always going to happen because of their cap issues. B, he was a below average left tackle. Great young man. I always feel awful with this conversation because Charles is one of my favorite Bears, actually. He's a good person. He's just not a great football player. They needed to get better at the position. They did prioritize it. After they got their quarterback, they committed basically the rest of their draft, that second pick and then the fifth one that they got to the position. I am aggravated that Elijah Wilkinson was the only veteran they brought in because he clearly, and again, this is going to be tough because he's one of the nicest kids I've ever met, can't play left tackle. I'm sorry, I don't need to see a second exhibition game to know that. I tend to doubt that he's what you want at right tackle. He may be a guard. When they signed him, they talked about his experience at right tackle and guard with the Broncos. He was there 4 years as an undrafted free agent. He did start 26 games over those 4 seasons, but if you do the math, that means that he's a backup or a journeyman. And so the fact that you were counting on him and 2 rookies and then moving Jermaine Ifedi outside when he had failed at tackle with the Seahawks, and that's why he's a Bear in the first place. And that's what the Bears told us when they signed him as a free agent last year, that he may not have done great at tackle with the Seahawks, but we think he's a guard. And he went in there and played pretty well. I know he didn't play bad at right tackle the last 5 weeks last year, so we'll see. But Trevor, I don't think that they did nearly enough at the position the way they handled it. But I wouldn't be aggravated about the loss of Charles Leno.
I wouldn't be aggravated about the loss of Charles Leno. I think it's fair to be aggravated by the way they address the tackle position. And this kind of goes back, you mentioned the cap issues, right? And first off, as we've talked before, the Bears couldn't have planned their contract out in a way that, knowing that a pandemic was coming, that they were going to be in a cap crunch. But one area that you can critique for, and one area that, the part of the reason they ended up in a cap crunch is because of the quarterback position a little bit. Because when you go out, you had to go out, you go out and trade for Nick Foles and bring on that cap hit. That doesn't work. Then you have to go out and bring Andy Dalton in. You're already in a cap crunch. So now in back-to-back years, you are spending money at that position because you've had misses. And it really, when they were up against the cap already, it kind of hamstrung them for what they could do, So when you talk about that, there were some quality offensive tackles that we discussed during the off season that I think all of us liked and we thought were potential fits for the Bears. But when you have to prioritize the quarterback position, at the time when they go out and sign Andy Dalton, they don't know Justin Fields is going to fall to where he fell, right? They had to make another move like that, and it probably kept them from being able to go at that higher tier offensive tackle.
Well, yeah, Sean, Kyle, and I would add to that the biggest problem with the cap here is that I never understood the contract they gave Leno in the first place. There was no need for it. It was an early extension. He had had his best year in 2018, and then he ends up going to the Pro Bowl as an alternate, which was just a joke because he just didn't play that well. He played better than he did, before and after. But Sean, I think the issue there is they were cap strapped, I guess is the expression I'm looking for. It wasn't a great year at tackle in free agency. To Kyle's point, there were some good ones. The only one that you would have made a big free agent splash on was Cam Robinson, who the Jaguars kept. They didn't let him get away. The rest of these guys were all 32, 33-year-olds. A couple of them are still on the streets. Mitch Schwartz he had his back surgery last February. He is almost ready to go. He is an all-pro right tackle, and he is going to get signed by somebody. You had a few lesser guys out there. Jared Veldheer retired. I think Ricky Wagner is still on the street right now. Russell Okung is still out there. Russell Okung is a Pro Bowl left tackle. His problem is I think he's played 1 or 2 full seasons in 8 or 9 years in the league. So there were options. Those guys are out there because they want more money, Sean, to Kyle's point. They were too expensive for the Bears. I just would have been happier with a more quality backup than Elijah Wilkinson. I just wanted, last year you bring in Jason Spriggs and it didn't work out, but he's a former second-round pick who can play left or right. Maybe what they're relying on is we know Alex Bars can play anywhere on the line, and I thought Alex Bars was going to be a starting left tackle in the league going into Notre Dame in his senior year before he tore that ACL. But it was just frustrating that once Jenkins couldn't go, suddenly you're looking at Wilkinson at left tackle, who we were told when they signed probably wasn't a left tackle.
Well, yeah, look, they put themselves in this position where, all these guys that we're talking about, Elijah Wilkinson, even Tevin Jenkins, Larry Borum, none of them have experience at left tackle. And so they sort of put themselves in this position. While, yes, they're very optimistic that Tevin Jenkins can be a left tackle in the NFL. Once he goes down, they don't have a solid option at that position. And you would have liked to see them address that with a little bit of experience somewhere along the way. And I guess that goes back to sort of what we're saying, where these guys who have that experience were expensive on the free agent market. And you look back at what happened with Charles Leno and, where the Bears were cap-wise. They had to cut somebody. They had to make room for their draft picks, and they had to create a little bit of wiggle room here for anything that they might need during the season. And I don't know that there was necessarily a better option for who you cut other than Charles Leno. You're looking at maybe Jimmy Graham or Akeem Hicks, and obviously they didn't want to do either of those guys.
And this also, goes back to them not being able to get a long-term deal done with Allen Robinson and having to absorb the franchise tag number.
That's a huge part of it, Kyle. I mean, you're talking about at least $10 million in wasted cap space right now with A-Rob on that franchise tag, as opposed to what you could have structured if you'd have given him a long-term deal. I understand that some of the concern there, nobody wants to deal with reality, but there is a chance that the cap will not go up or could even go down again next year based on the eventual full reckoning that the players and the owners have to do over lost revenue from last year due to COVID, and possibly even more lost revenue this year. We'll just have to wait and see. And so this is not just the Bears. Every team in the league has been reluctant to do too many long-term deals, not knowing if another cap crunch like they got this year is coming next year. But the Robinson situation was unique, and some players are getting done. Now, part of the Bears' problem, guys, is they desperately want to and pretty much have to get Roquan Smith done in the next couple months. They do not want to let him get to free agency where now they're looking at a deal where they have to put a tag on him. And very interesting there, we talked to Roquan yesterday, and he does not have an agent. I remember going back to his rookie year. He worked out his deal himself with a lawyer because as a rookie, you can do that. Now that they have slotting with these CBAs, there's not much room to negotiate. But for this deal, he needs some expertise, but we'll save that for down the road because he's very happy right now. They're not concerned about it. And we're not going to make this the full offensive tackle show. But guys, I do want to at least get to 2 more really big stories that have developed here. We know about Jason Peters, so I'm going to hang on to him for a minute. And Sean, what has really intrigued me about all this is that we may have been talking on the sidelines during that rookie minicamp, but I took one look at Larry Borum And he had changed his body so much since the last tape I watched of him at Missouri, which was basically the last 4 games he played. Looked like a different guy. Didn't even look like I expected him to. As a matter of fact, we have a question here from Skippy Klein, wants to know, did we see Larry Borum as a potential starter this season? I will tell you, no, didn't see him as a potential starter this season, Skip, but Matt Nagy told us yesterday that they had a 2nd or 3rd round grade on him. And now normally that's teams and coaches trying to put perfume on a pig. But in this case, I know there were some teams, that had him rated higher than they put him. And that, by the way, that was not a shot at Larry Borum. I hope people, I worry in social media these days, guys, you say things that, people understood you were trying to compliment, not criticize, and then something like that can bounce back at you. So I'm sorry if somebody doesn't get the reference.
I think at this point, most people that follow you know of your Larry Borum love.
Well, I don't know if it's Larry Borum love, but I thought that he had a chance. I thought they could be starting 2 tackles this year, Borum on the right side and him on the left side. I really like Jermaine Ifedi. I just don't know if he has a position that he can play consistently, and it didn't work at right tackle in Seattle, so we'll see. And by the way, another question I asked yesterday, he has not participated for a second in training camp. He's on the PUP list. We were told a hip flexor. We don't know what his status is as you get closer to opening day. And yeah, he's a veteran, but it's not like he can just stay on the PUP list until the Monday before the first game. So you got to keep an eye on that. But getting back to Larry Borum, he went home from Missouri and worked with a private coach. There's a lot of these private position tutors around the league right now. Took off about 35 pounds and then put about 8 to 10 pounds back on in the weight room. Showed up looking like a completely different guy, but what immediately caught my attention was his feet. And when we talk about the difference in left and right tackles, it's all about their feet and their athleticism and their ability to play both power and finesse football. And he looked, you can't tell this out on a rookie mini camp, but he looked like, gee, maybe could he be a prospect for this? And then I started talking to guys. I talked to my buddy Tom Thayer, who played 10 years in the league and, of course, is part of the Bears broadcast team, my former broadcast partner. I talked to Juan Castillo yesterday. I talked to a couple other sources around the league, and they all said the same thing. They're not so sure at this point that he isn't the better left tackle prospect than Tevin Jenkins. And the Bears may have, in fact, got their bookend tackles, but it may be flipped around. I asked, Sean, you'll remember this. I don't know if you'll remember it, but I think you might. I think the first or second day of rookie camp, I asked Matt, so what does the depth chart look like now at left tackle? And I was just focused on Jenkins at the time. Well, by the time we got to the end of veteran camp, which was 6 weeks later, and Matt said, we just don't have a depth chart yet. So I asked him again as we went home for the summer, and he just smiled at me. He said, yeah, we still don't have a depth chart. Yeah, well, they did, but they weren't going to share it with us. Well, when you get to training camp, when you get to that first preseason game, you have to put out a depth chart. And lo and behold, there is Larry Borum. He's 3 behind Jenkins, but Jenkins isn't playing, so he's your number 2. And so now the Bears have started talking about it. Now they're selling the same thing with him that they were selling with Jenkins. Doesn't matter which side, they can all play. No, it does matter which side. But Borum may be the better left tackle prospect at this point than Jenkins. They're both maulers. They're both tough guys. But he may now actually have the better body for it.
Yeah, and I think somebody may have asked Matt the other day, focused on the Jason Peters signing, if that maybe moves Larry over to the right side. And he said no. He said, Larry's on the left side right now. And, that's a really it's funny how the Bears got here, I guess. And yeah, you talk about Larry Borum, and I think he was up to like 250 towards the end of his college season, and he's more around 230 right now. I'm sorry, 330.
Yeah,
he's more around 330 right now, pound wise, for his size. And you wonder how this is going to play out here. He missed a little bit of time there with a concussion through training camp, so he hasn't gotten too many practices at that left tackle position, just because he was out for a little while. But he had practiced once or twice with the starting team. I think maybe he had one practice with the starting offense at left tackle before his concussion. And now he's, we'll see what he can do there on that left side a little bit more now that he's back out there on the field, and we can, throw him into the fire, so to speak.
Kyle, this is going to be really interesting these next couple of weeks now, because what they're left with, Borum did return from the concussion protocol yesterday, which means I suspect we will see him on the field Saturday. My guess is that we will see him on the field at right tackle, earlier rather than later because of you got injured. You got Latavius Simmons starting there, but he doesn't appear to be an NFL starter, and we don't know when Ifedi will be back. And you're trying to get some snaps. They'll get some snaps for Jason Peters. Promise, guys, we're getting to Jason Peters in a minute. They'll get some snaps for him Saturday, but not a lot. You could see in practice on Wednesday. Or Thursday, I guess it was his first practice, that he was on a knee pretty much the whole time, that he wasn't up and on the line. So I'm not saying he's not in football shape. When you're 39 years old and trying to play with 20-year-old kids, you can take a knee once in a while. But they got to be careful. They got to take it slow and get him ready if they hope to get him through 16 games. So we may see a little bit of Borum, at the end of the game. Their issue, though, is because they don't know when Peters will be ready, what kind of football shape he's in, and what kind of load he can carry. And they don't have any other veteran presence. They've got to assume right now that Elijah Wilkinson is the opening day left tackle, even though everybody I talk to knows he's not really good enough to live with out there.
They're in trouble if Elijah Wilkinson is starting week 1 at left tackle. But it's hard to see how this is going to play out over the next few weeks. I think you see Larry Borum probably at both positions, right, on Saturday. Yeah. If Jermaine Ifedi can't get off the PUP list soon, they're going to have to start moving guys around trying to figure this out. You mentioned Latavius Simmons. I'm going to bring up this question because we actually had one about that. Not expecting this close to the regular season to be getting Latavius Simmons questions, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, asking me from Joe LaPointe, Joseph, how did I grade Simmons against Miami? Dude has some long arms. You're right about the arms. There's no question about that. The Bears talked a lot about that when they drafted him in the 7th round last year, that he's just a fascinating prospect. And when you see those long arms, you immediately start asking the question about left tackle, if it's an athletic enough body. He was listed on the depth chart at left tackle at one point last year, I'm pretty sure. He's been strictly a right tackle so far this year, and I think that's probably because they knew that they had Jenkins over there at left tackle. I don't grade everybody in preseason games, Joe. I'm sorry, but there's 90 guys, and it's just too hard to do. I did watch the tape a couple times, and I guess it's good news in that he didn't stick out. So he wasn't getting beat out there, but he wasn't overly noticeable either. We will be watching him a lot more closely this week because he's going to start. While you've got Ifedi down, he's going to start against a pretty good Buffalo Bills team. So he's a guy that, as a matter of fact, the way we were approaching our game preview columns during the preseason is focusing more on 5 most important things the Bears should get out of it, rather than previewing the opponent, because they're not going to play Buffalo this year, and who cares about Buffalo in the second preseason game other than Mitch. We'll get to that too. But will be. I wrote today, that one of the key things is with all the focus on the left tackle position, watching the right tackle position, and watching Simmons, because he's an interesting guy, Sean. I don't know if he's going to make the football team. On one hand, we're talking about him as a possible answer at tackle, but you look at all these bodies they've got out there now, and they've only got room for, if they carry an extra, it's 9 offensive linemen, and that's still just 2 tackles and a guard tackle combo along with a center as backups. So he's at risk of not making the team. He's a possibility to be an opening day starter.
That's what's so wild about this situation that the Bears are in at the tackle position. I mean, it's crazy how many guys we're talking about, and with the injuries and everything, and adding new guys into the mix with Jason Peters. It's just, if you're a Bears fan, I would be very concerned about where this is heading, because they don't have a lot of time to get this sorted out. And yeah, maybe you can get it sorted out within the first couple of weeks of the season. But you'd like to have that sorted out by week 1, but I don't know that they have a really good answer. And it is kind of interesting. Simmons is a guy who a couple of weeks ago, I mean, we would have been surprised talking about him as a potential, starting right tackle. And we would have been more likely to talk about him as a guy who could get cut. You never know. There's so many bodies at these positions that somebody's going to have to get cut. And now here we are, and we're wondering if, how did he look against Miami? Could he be the starting right tackle in a couple of weeks? And it's certainly a concern. And I guess the fact that we're sitting here 30 minutes into our podcast and still talking about the tackle positions is an indicator.
That's what I was just going to say. We're 34 minutes into this, and we're still talking about the offensive line, which I would not have expected with, particularly the way last weekend went with all the Justin Fields hype. But this is where we are, and I think this question here, while it's hard to rank, offensive lines across the league at this stage, I think this is a good way to put a bow on it as we get into Peters and everything here. And JR asked, as it stands now, where would your team rank the Bears offensive line among all NFL teams, Hub?
Yeah, JR, it's a great question, even though we can't answer it because all NFL teams still have 90 guys in camp, and most have some competitions going on. There are injury scenarios. We will get into this kind of thing, once we see what the 32 final rosters look like. We know some teams are deeper and stronger than others. But I would say this, and I'm curious to get Sean's input, and then we're going to have a quick Jason Peters comment, and then we're going to move on. I'm going to say two things. First of all, JR, if you'll hold on for a second, I'm a half hour in and have not mentioned or thanked our great sponsor, Hines Lumber and Construction. We appreciate Hines Lumber so much for helping us bring you these podcasts each week. They have 11 locations around Chicagoland for all of your building needs, for all of your rehab needs, for all of your decorating needs. Make sure you go to one of the 11 stops for our friends at Hines Lumber. As far as the Bears offensive line, Sean, they've got a chance to be top 10 from guard to guard. That may be a little aggressive, that they're not top 1, top 5. I'm not pretending they got a boatload of all pros here. But the more I look at James Daniels, the more I see that all-pro ceiling is potentially still there and may be there at guard. I always knew it was there at center. I don't know if it's there at guard. But you talk about another guy who's changed his body. He was in the media room the other day, and he is one impressive, by the way, still just 23-year-old young man going into his 4th season as a Bear. Cody Whitehair has already been to a Pro Bowl. That was playing center. He's a very, very good guard. And Sam Mustipher, hey, Jay Hilgenberg should be in the Hall of Fame. It's one of the great oversights in the NFL right now. He was an undrafted rookie free agent, who started for the Bears, I think, for 8 or 9 years before he moved on to Cleveland in a contract dispute. Became one of the best centers, certainly the team of the 80s, in terms of being a perennial All-Pro. And you look at Mustipher and what he's doing and the respect he's getting around the league. So from guard to guard, JR, 3 spots inside, they are much improved. They are, I think, right, sniffing at that top 10. Tackle, you got to rank them bottom 5. I don't know how you can do anything else. And so now we'll wait and see as this all comes together. But quickly, Kyle, and I go to the older guys on the podcast, not that you're in my league, but you've been around, a lot longer than Sean, so you probably remember more of Jason Peters. This is a guy who at the University of Arkansas played tight end and defensive end. And he was a defensive end at the end of his career at Arkansas and was signed as a priority free agent, not even priority, maybe an undrafted rookie free agent by the Buffalo Bills to try at tight end. He hung around, I want to say, on the practice squad. I don't know if they even had practice squads in those days. I think we did have practice squads already, and began to grow, and they decided to try him at tackle. And he literally added about 70 pounds to get up to tackle size. And what he has always been is an exceptional athlete for the position because, he was an athlete. He was a receiver, as he learned the game of football, but he's also been a bad body. I mean, even going back to his heyday in the middle of those 4 All-Pro seasons, those 9 Pro Bowl seasons, he just looks kind of big and sloppy. And again, I don't mean that negatively. I'm just trying to describe it in football terms. You look at, usually the first thing you look at with these guys is their shoulders and their arms, and his are not particularly impressive, but he is so thick. It's almost like from the knees up, he's a big rectangle out there. And, and he is every bit of 330, 340 pounds. And for the few snaps he took on his one practice Thursday, he was the first guy off the ball every time. And so now whether he was jumping the snap count or not was hard to tell from where I was sitting. But you've got now a guy who, if not a sure first ballot Hall of Famer, because he may be, he's been that good, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. And the question is, what does he have left? And even if he's still 80, 90%, can he manage that through 17 weeks?
And not exactly the most prototypical looking left tackle in the NFL, at least by current day standards. As we've seen kind of the form of NFL tackles change here to become a little bit smaller, a little bit quicker. But the man just gets the job done. At 39 years old, you are right. You have to wonder how much he has left in the tank. You wonder how healthy he can be. But, for the most part in his career, he has been able to stay on the field. But when you look at what they have now, to me, JR's question about how do you rank this offensive line, for this Bears offensive line to really have a chance, I think they need Jason Peters to be 80 to 90%.
Well, and Sean, it's not as if there's not examples of this around the National Football League. You look at the team the Bears are going to see Sunday night. You're going to have a 40-year-old left tackle and a 39-year-old left tackle. Because make no mistake, Jason Peters is going to be the starter at left tackle if he's healthy. It's that simple. A breathing, moving Jason Peters is still light years ahead of anything else the Bears have at the position. Even though I think Borum may have a future, and I'm still excited to see Jenkins, so he'll be the guy. But this is not, 39 and 40, that's pushing it, with Peters and Whitworth. But these left tackles playing into their mid and late 30s is not that unusual. So it's not hopeless. It's not a Hail Mary. But best case, it's going to be something that we're going to be watching every single week and hope that he's able to go 60 minutes. And once he's in shape to do that, hope that he's able to stay healthy. Yeah,
and Hub, I'll echo your comment on yesterday, Thursday, haven't gotten to see Jason Peters in person. He's a huge man. I mean, he doesn't look like your prototypical left tackle. I like that you said boxy sort of, because he's almost like a giant SpongeBob out there with two legs, and he just looks like he's a very uniquely shaped dude, and it's hard to tell when you're standing 100 feet away exactly, what type of shape he's in, but he's been doing this a long time. He knows what his body needs to be like to be ready to play.
Yeah, for those of you who are live with us via YouTube or StreamYard, you see me laughing because I almost used the SpongeBob reference in my first column Wednesday. But again, I got scared away by social media and thinking people would think I was taking shots at him, because not at all. But it's an interesting way to describe his body. And by the way, it's a good thing, because I mentioned he's not fat and sloppy. I have seen some great offensive linemen who are fat and sloppy, but they get away with it because they have such natural power. We call it country strong. And I think that, Jason Peters is country strong, but it's not like he's carrying around a lot of blubber. He's just a big man, and it's very, very impressive. So, guys, we do want to at least touch on a few other things. We've only got a few minutes left here. And so, very quickly, let's go to the quarterback story, but let's start with something that I'm intrigued by, just because of it's going to be an emotional day for a lot of folks, and that's that you're going to see. I think you're going to see Josh Allen, for a while, maybe the first quarter for the Buffalo Bills.
No, actually, you're not.
Oh, is Mitch starting?
Mitch is starting.
Yeah, Josh Allen. They're holding him out.
Okay, I had not even paid any attention to that, because that's how meaningless the other team is in these exhibition games. So all right, you're going to see Mitch Trubisky under center from the jump. You're not going to see him for 4 quarters, but we're going to see a lot of Mitch, and it's going to be, I'm sure, on everybody's mind. I hope that the crowd at Soldier Field is going to be kind to him, because he doesn't deserve the crap I know you're going to give him. And it's just unfortunate, because even Bears players are not going to appreciate it. One of the things, Sean, that we have learned during the course of this week is that whether people want to believe it or not, Mitch genuinely was one of the most popular guys in that locker room the last few years. And there isn't a single member of his team that's going to be happy to see him in the other uniform.
No, not at all. And we talked to several guys. Eddie Jackson sticks out. Eddie Jackson was like, that's my guy. He's excited to see Mitch and to play against him here. And, there's even though things didn't end well, nobody has ever knocked Mitch as a person. And those guys really, really enjoyed spending time with him. And even Matt Nagy, they went through a lot of hard times, but those guys, those guys are still going to be friends when all this is over and years down the road.
Yeah. I mean, Mitch is a good guy. He was liked in the locker room. I think he was liked pretty much by anyone that knows him, that's had to interact with him. He's a good kid. I will say this, though. If he goes out and has a really good first half against the Bears on Saturday, I'm just deleting my Twitter account, because I'm just not going to be able to take Bears fans just being silly on Twitter.
Well, yeah, I would have deleted my account 5 years ago if we could, Kyle. So you're just gonna have to put it back in again. Don't do that. You just gotta, get earplugs. It's what I would like Bears fans to remember is that as a second-year player, he took them to the playoffs when nobody expected it and went to the Pro Bowl, by the way. Now, I'm not trying to have my cake and eat it too. I'm not a big fan of using Pro Bowl as an example because Charles Leno went to the Pro Bowl that year too. So what does that tell you? But the point is, it's not as if Mitch was a complete failure. He just became everybody's favorite punching bag, and he is such a good young man. I'm hoping that he comes out and tears it up, and that in whatever limited chances he gets to show this year, that next year when he's a free agent again, he gets a chance to go somewhere and start. I'm hoping he's the next Ryan Tannehill because as a person, he's entitled to that kind of success, and I know he works at it. What I'm more intrigued to see is that the first quarter is going to be Andy Dalton versus Mitch Trubisky. Matt Nagy has told us Andy's going to play a quarter, maybe even a quarter and a half. But the second quarter, and I'm guessing maybe the third, because I don't think the Bills have that many quarterbacks they want to get on the field, is going to be Justin versus Mitch. And what do you think the reaction is going to be if Mitch outplays Justin? I'm not predicting it. I don't know what's going to happen. But I will tell you, Justin had his worst day of practice since he became a Bear on Thursday. Don't make anything out of that. I still think he's going to be a star. I'm not criticizing him. He did sit down Wednesday because of that slight groin irritation, but Matt did tell us he is going to play Saturday, so they wouldn't have put him out there Thursday if he wasn't healthy. It was a glorified walkthrough. He made some throws that he probably doesn't make in a game, but you're just extending the play, trying to get the ball out. But overall, he had his worst day throwing the football. He threw a couple picks, 2 more that should have been picked. He had one stretch of 7 passes where 2 were picked and 4 should have been. It was not a good showing. And so that may be the dog days. That may be this message we can't get across to everybody, that there are reasons you don't start rookie quarterbacks on day one because of the learning process. What I saw on Thursday was those picks was because he was throwing balls to receivers who were open the second the ball left his hand, but he didn't know the DB was going to close on the ball the way they did. And this goes back to something I wrote, Kyle, that when he talked last Saturday about actually the game was kind of slow, that's because he was playing second and third stringers. He still hasn't played a first defense. We don't know if he's going to see a first defense Saturday, but Mitch has. Mitch has at least that experience. And so it is going to be interesting to see how the two of them perform going head to head.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
No, it's, there was a couple – the hype train almost went off the rails Saturday afternoon with Justin Fields having a kind of a big second half there, and there was 2 things that kept running through my head. And I should go ahead and say this first. I'm on or in team start him, just but that's so I'm not trying to take anything away or anything like that. But as you said, he's playing against second and third teamers. Also, first preseason game, there is no game script planning. They're just out there running plays, trying to get practice in essentially glorified practice, right? Defenses aren't working to take away specific players, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Now, what I'm interested in, and I don't know if either of you guys have talked to any of the coaches about this stuff, usually in a traditional preseason when we had 4 games, the third game was the dress rehearsal where you got about as close as to what you were going to get from an actual regular season experience. Since there's only 3 games this year, are we counting the second one where there's actually a little bit more game planning involved this week, or is that still going to be the third week, do you think?
Well, actually, Matt was asked that question, and he said he just hadn't decided yet. And I don't think this was a situation of where he just didn't want to share it with the media. I think they really haven't. It's new. It's a new frontier for them. They've never had. Last year they had no preseason games. This is the first time they've had 3 instead of 4. And they do still have various COVID, mitigations and protocols they're going through. So, Sean, I don't think that anybody knows the answer to Kyle's question, including Matt. He did tell us that week 3 he expects some of the starters may sit and some may play, and he doesn't know how long, but they haven't figured that out yet. And I would also, Sean, say to our buddy Mr. Nabors here, I don't want people to misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with being in the start him immediately camp. That's a choice you make. It doesn't mean you're going to ruin him. It does mean that you risk setting him back by starting him too soon. And more to my point, it means that you're willing to write off the season, because you don't go into an NFL season with a middle-aged defense that may be in its last run, and with the commitments you have made to strengthening other areas of the team, and then putting a rookie quarterback out there, knowing you're going to lose a few games with rookie mistakes, and pretend that you're trying to contend. So, for all Bears fans, because I've been battling this all summer long, because I'm adamantly, obviously, in the let him wait and earn his turn camp. And that's based on, decades of history of how that impacts the odds of him being successful. But that aside, I get the excitement. I'm not saying you're going to ruin him if you start him. I'm saying you're writing off the season. And both as a member of the media, as a fan, and somebody who likes the Bears organization, I don't want to see him make that mistake, because I think there's a chance that this could be a playoff team this year if everything goes right. And I do assume that Fields will be starting before the season is over. I just don't think I think you got to acknowledge, if you're rushing him out there day one, that you just don't really care that much about how the season goes.
Yeah, and look, Andy Dalton, he didn't look good in the preseason game last week, but he was barely on the field. He played a couple snaps and that was it. But in general, I don't know about you, Hub, but I would say that he's looked pretty good this training camp, and he's limited his mistakes, and yeah, he's not the guy who's going to wow you very often, but he's done a really good job in running this offense, and his teammates seem to think that he's really on top of what everybody's responsibilities are when they're out there on the field.
Yeah, guys, I'm not going to try and rewrite history here. You can go to shawlocal.com right now. And Kyle, I don't know how long we archive articles for, but you'll find the 15 I've written on how disappointed I was that Andy Dalton was the choice and is the choice. I mean, it's like what Sean, I think it was Kyle actually said earlier about the other tackles that were available out there, whether it was a Bridge or your starter. I thought there were better options than Andy Dalton. So I'm not trying to suddenly become the president of the Andy Dalton fan club. We're just talking about the difference between veteran experience and a guy who has 142 NFL starts and took 5 teams to the playoffs by being a game manager, which is what you want to do with this Bears lineup, as opposed to throwing the rookie out there and living with his mistakes. And let me just add, I lost my train of thought there. It is not coincidence that on Wednesday, Andy Dalton had by far his best practice as a Bear, leading up to the rather disappointing day from Justin Fields on Thursday. And guys, don't make too much of any of this, but it's all we've got to look at right now is these practices that they're having up there.
You mentioned Andy Dalton taking teams to the playoff 5 years in a row. That seems like a long memory. Andy Dalton in Dallas last year just really didn't impress me. If we were talking one of those other bridge quarterbacks, I think you'd have a much stronger argument for Justin Fields sitting. I think you can live with the rookie mistakes when compared to Andy Dalton. Maybe I'm wrong. We're going to find out pretty quickly once we get into the season. Sean, are they going to be doing this during the Bears game tomorrow?
Is the air show is tomorrow? It might even be at noon. I got to double check that. But I think it is during the Bears game. Yeah.
Are we going to have Blue Angels buzzing the stadium while Justin Fields is running up and down the
It's going to be quite a day over at the lake.
Yeah, guys, I will tell you, I do have a memory, I think, of a few years back where the air show did go on during an exhibition game. And the fans actually did thoroughly enjoy it, to be honest with you. I seem to recall even seeing some of the players on the sidelines looking up at various points. I'm sure the coaches wouldn't be too thrilled about it going on during the game as a distraction, but it is a possibility. I'm just jealous of Sean because back in my younger days, I had friends who lived on the coast there on the lake, and it is fun. It's a great weekend. So we would encourage anybody who doesn't have tickets for the Bears game, get out and enjoy the air show. Hopefully there'll be an air show at Soldier Field. Kyle, bring it completely back to where you just left it. I would add with the Andy Dalton Dallas experience that the way that offensive line came apart from the beginning of the season on, he actually was in a very similar situation to what we fear he may be in with this Bears offensive line. And again, I'm not a Dalton fan. I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but he actually wasn't that bad. He was better in Dallas last year than Nick Foles was in Chicago. That's why he's number 1 and Nick is number 3 right now.
That's not a great endorsement, but I threw a question up here from Bob O'Neill. Said, "Why is Dalton the choice? What did he do last year in Dallas last year that gives you any hope of him being decent?" And you actually made a good point there. The offensive line in Dallas was really a dumpster fire last year. There's not a really good way to put it. Bob sent another question saying he had a lot of weapons there. He did have a lot of weapons there, but he also was under siege. He's probably going to be under siege here with the way the offensive line is shaping up at the tackle position. And then you get into the question of, do you want someone who's not mobile like Andy Dalton in the backfield, or is it better to have Justin Fields? At the same time, you have Justin Fields back there with two bad offensive tackles taking shots that he doesn't need to take. And we've seen time and time again in the NFL that you really don't want young quarterbacks starting to get a case of the yip because they're getting blasted all the time. So, a lot of this to me does come down to the offensive tackle position about, how this Bears offense is going to operate, no matter if it's Andy Dalton or Justin Fields.
Yeah, and Sean, listen, I in a direct answer to both Kyle and Bob's question here, what gives me hope is that Andy Dalton is a veteran starter in the league who has proven that he can win meaningful games, not playoff games. He's 0-4 in the playoffs. He didn't go that fifth year because he broke his thumb week 14. But being asked to be the game manager, to do what we think this Bears offense is going to do, being given a greatly strengthened tight end position, which is the key security blanket for game manager quarterbacks, given a number one receiver in Allen Robinson. The other thing about the Cowboys last year is that even some of those skill guys were banged up, and Dalton himself only played 9 games. I think, did he end up on the COVID list? I think he did, or he got injured at some point. I forget exactly what it was.
Concussion.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So he missed some time. But what gives me hope is that I keep watching the Bears defense. As a matter of fact, again, get to shawlocal.com. That is today's column. In visiting with Sean Desai and some of his top players yesterday on Thursday. I realize you may not be listening to the podcast at the same time we're recording it, but talking on Thursday with Eddie Jackson, talking with Roquan Smith, talking with Bilal Nichols, which interestingly enough, the 3 young guns on this defense, along with Jalen Johnson, the guys who may be the future, they're just raving about what's going on out there. And Sean, when we watch it from day to day, you can see it. I mean, this defense definitely does have some of that. They call it juice. They have some of that juice back that we saw in 2018. That's why Desai was given the job, because he was there as Vic's protege. That's why Mike Pettin was brought in. He is also a former cohort of Vic Fangio. And I think that if that defense plays anywhere up to 18 standards, and this group is actually more talented than 18 when you realize what they've added in Robert Quinn and Tayshaun Gibson, Jeremiah Adeochu, and some of the depth there. The way Bilal Nichols and Roquan Smith have developed, it's a more talented group. It's got the 530-something starting, which is what scares you there, again, is the age. But if this is a top 5 defense, and if the running game is what it was the last 6 weeks, you don't want Justin Fields out there to put on an air show, or Andy Dalton. You want a guy who is not going to make any mistakes and is going to know how to convert third downs and move the chains. And so I think they can get away with Andy Dalton. He's not going to the Pro Bowl. I'm not pretending that he's going to be the big thing at quarterback this year, but that's why from the other camp, a lot of us believe that he has to be the choice right now. And we even talked yesterday with Bill Lazor, the offensive coordinator, about some of the things that a rookie quarterback can learn while sitting on the bench, that he needs to learn while sitting on the bench, that Aaron Rodgers actually learned in his 3 years on the bench, that Tom Brady and Drew Brees learned in their first year and a half on the bench. Guys, the way it's done with almost every great quarterback is they sit and wait and watch and learn. And Patrick Mahomes, by the way, who spent this entire rookie year sitting on the bench. So I think, again, Sean, I'll let you and Kyle have the last word on this before we say goodbye. We can give you all the reasons for choosing Dalton over Fields or Fields over Dalton. It's not an exact science. I vote for the Bears are doing the right thing. We know where Kyle sits. Sean, I'm not sure that you've put your name on it. You don't get to hide in the closet anymore. So tell us what you think.
No, I'm in favor of starting Dalton for, I wouldn't put a number on it, but I'm okay with them starting Dalton week 1 and for several weeks here at the beginning of the season. And I know people might roll their eyes at this, but don't underestimate. You were talking with Bill Lazor yesterday, the offensive coordinator. Don't underestimate how much Fields. All of this is new. Lazor talked about how on Saturday, he came over and they were looking at the still photos on the tablet after each series, and that's something that's new to him. He didn't do that in college. They don't do that, in high school, and that's one example. And having the coach and the earpiece, that's totally new to all this stuff is new to Justin, and it's going to take some getting used to. And yes, that's what the preseason is for. But I don't know that, you're necessarily, I don't know that part of 3 preseason games is enough to get you ready to do that for a full game. And you can't underestimate the experience of a guy like Andy Dalton.
So I'll say this. I think a good way to look at it is, while I think Justin Fields could start right now, I don't think you should be up in arms with the Bears starting Andy Dalton week 1. If Hub's idea of him being a game manager is a fair and possible outcome for how this season could go, everyone is just assuming, if Justin Fields gets on the field, he's just going to tear it up, right? But you look at, I'm just going to pick a couple guys from last year to compare it to. Tua did not start right away, but once he did get in, really struggled. Justin Herbert got in, I believe, week 2, pretty much took the job away from Tyrod Taylor after the little weird incident with the needle on the sideline or whatever that was. But those are 2 kind of extremes, right? And you shouldn't expect either outcome from Justin. Like, he's probably not going to go out and be Justin Herbert. He's probably not going to go out and perform as poorly as Tua. The guy that I kind of keep going back to is Kyler, right? That started right away in Arizona. And Kyler won them some games his rookie year, and he also lost them some games his rookie year. And that's probably what you're going to get out of Justin Fields. And if you do think you're going to be a contending team, you don't want to take those losses. So, if Andy Dalton can be that game manager, I get that thought process. I believe he can't be that game manager at this point of his career, but I don't think you should just be trying to you shouldn't be incredibly upset that is the thought process.
Well, but let's also keep in mind there, Kyle, with the Justin Herbert example, that he kept the job because the Chargers had written off the season. And they still wanted to start Tyrod Taylor. They knew going in they weren't a contender, but they still wanted to start with Tyrod Taylor. But, when they had the unfortunate incident with the collapsed lung, it was week 2, they went with Herbert. There was no reason not to leave Herbert out there at that point because Taylor wasn't ready to go until week 4 or week 5 again. Anyway, why go back to him? Again, that's why Trevor Lawrence should be starting in Jacksonville. Zach Wilson should be starting in New York because those teams don't plan on winning more than 4, 5, 6 games. The Bears are going to take the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. We're going to see if this schedule is as brutal as it appears. If they are hanging around 500 or even winning some games, they're going to stay with Andy Dalton. If they have the same experience they did in 2017, where they get to week 4 and Mike Glennon is crapping all over the field and Mitch gets out there and looks okay, they're going to stay, and they stayed with Mitch the rest of the way. They'll do that with Justin. He could be out there early, but as long as this team is competitive, that's what you're waiting for before Justin Fields. And by the way, another piece, and we really do have to go here, there's going to be a Fields package. I'm convinced of that, much like the Taysom Hill packages down in New Orleans. He's too good an athlete not to. And they actually did this with Mitch, remember, early on, those first few weeks. They're going to have 5 or 6 plays written up for Justin Fields. And they're going to get him out there with 2 hopes. 1, maybe it'll be a big play. I'm talking about regular season now. But 2, you get a few plays here, a few plays there, get a feel for that. There's nothing that's going to happen until September 12th that's going to show Justin what the speed of the NFL game really is. And giving that to him slowly is not a bad thing. So, guys, we're going to continue to talk about this the next few weeks. We didn't even get to some of the other stories going around, but an hour is our limit. We just went over the limit. So we want to thank you all again so much for being with us. To our friends at Heinz Lumber Company, remember, 11 great locations throughout Chicagoland for all your building, construction, addition, rehab needs, whatever it may be. Get to the Heinz Lumber location closest to you. More than anything, I should say, we do want to thank each of you for spending time with us. Remember, you can download a subscription to our podcast by going to shawlocal.com. You can do it at iTunes. You can do it in the App Store on your phone. It'll be downloaded automatically for you each week. It's going to be a fun season, guys. There's plenty to talk about. Hopefully a good season. We'll be back next week to tell you what happened in Justin versus Mitch round 1. And we don't know if there'll ever be round 2, but we'll see, as well as what's going on with the Bears offensive line and everything else going on up at Hallis Hall for now. Have a great week, everybody. And Sean, when you're not at the Bears game with me, enjoy the air show.
I'm going to go get outside.
Take care, everybody.